Hi, it's Crystal. So today I thought it would be fun to go over all the writing specific masterclasses that I've taken and kind of do like a general overview of who I would recommend this class for and my overall thoughts about the class, and also maybe a point or two of like main takeaways that I got from taking the class. So I want to get through all of these, so I'm not going to go into like a lot of detail, but I don't know, I thought it would be fun and maybe, I don't know, informative or something. So before I get started, if you don't know, I write novels. I write like dark fiction. And right now my writing is kind of in flux, so I'm not really sure what I'm doing genre-wise, only that prior to like maybe a month and a half ago, when I said I wrote dark fiction, I meant like, you know, supernatural horror, paranormal, dark contemporary fantasy, so like real world fantasy. Now, you know, like dark fiction kind of means I'm writing some kind of twisted suspense that has some kind of like weird element to it. But I just wanted to preface that before I go through all of these, that I'm not really a short story writer. I do write poetry, but I write poetry for fun. And I do not write high fantasy. I don't write sci-fi. I have some sci-fi ideas, so maybe in the future. But anyway, let's get started. So I want to cover these first two together. Billy Collins teaches reading and writing poetry, and then Joyce Carol Oates teaches the art of the short story. And so I would recommend Billy Collins' poetry class, one, if you know who he is, which I didn't going into class, or two, if you ever like wanted to take a poetry class. I thought he did a really good job. It's kind of reminiscent of the poetry class that I had in college. I took poetry for like half semester for intro to creative writing. And it was kind of reminiscent of that, except he was like way more loosey-goosey than the poetry teacher I had. She was like such a stickler for the rules and for form. And she was like, I really want you to get the form down and the rules down, and then we could talk about breaking them. And I'm just kind of like, it's poetry, like, just do whatever you want. So he's very much in that do whatever you want camp. So I thought it was entertaining. I don't really have anything that I specifically got out of it, but I did find it enjoyable to watch. So next, Joyce Carol Oates. I would recommend this for the same reason as Billy Collins' class. If you have ever wanted to take a short fiction workshop, or if you are a fan of Joyce Carol Oates, then this class was very entertaining. She did have a little bit of like novel writing help in there, but her main focus was to help you with a short story. And so she did a really good job of helping you tell the difference between like a short story idea and a novel idea. It was very entertaining. Her writing itself is very dark. But very good. And so I read a couple of her short stories going through this class. So I really enjoyed going through this. I thought she was a really good teacher. It was kind of similar to the writing classes that I took when I was in college. So that's why I say that if you ever wanted to take some kind of writing class, this is about what you would get. But she did do a really good job. And she was entertaining. Every once in a while, I think I might like try writing a short story or two, so I have some tips now if I want to do that. Okay, so now the rest of these are all novel specific classes, even though there's going to be a couple where they touched on short stories, but I'm going to have these in order of like my least favorite to my favorite. And I'm going to start with the only one that I disliked. And that was N.K. Jemisin. Teaches fantasy and science fiction writing. I wanted to take this because I do have some sci-fi ideas, and I thought she might say something that would be helpful, and she did not. So she had several world building lessons, but I would pretty much only recommend this class if you are either a fan of N.K. Jemisin or you want to write similar to how she writes and you want to know how she world builds so like you can emulate it. That's what I recommend this for. She started the class off by saying that if you're writing your first book ever, then this class is not for you. Totally fair. And then she says that, you know, this class is for people who have been writing for a while and like you're ready to like seek publication. Me, right? No. What she needed to have said was this class is for people who specifically write fantasy, not even sci-fi, because I don't think there's anything in here that was helpful for like writing science fiction at all. So I think her caveat should have been, if you have been writing fantasy for a while and you maybe want to try some different world building things, this class is for you. Also, if you want to lecture on social politics, fine, take her class. I don't really think I got anything out of this. I did not enjoy it. It was boring. I was annoyed. Now, also keep in mind, I do not write high fantasy. I tried once and it was such a mess. It was like 10 years ago. So I'm not a fantasy writer. So maybe if I was a fantasy writer, maybe I'd find it more interesting. Or maybe if I'd read one of her books and was more familiar with her writing, maybe I'd find it more interesting. So that's who I would recommend the class for. If you are a fan of hers, or if you want to world build like her, she gives some, like I said, there are 6 world building lessons. She gives a lot of details on how to world build like her. I don't think it's very accessible. I don't think your average person is going to get that much out of it. But it could be because I don't write fantasy and I just felt like it was just like overwhelming. So all the rest of these classes I did enjoy, but I am going from my least favorite to my favorite. So next we have Amy Tan teaches fiction, memory, and imagination. She was such a delightful teacher. I really enjoyed like listening to her talk, but I've not read anything that she's written. I haven't even seen the movie adaptation of the Joy Luck Club. I've heard of it, but like I'm not familiar exactly with what she does. So I didn't get a lot out of this class. Most of my notes that I took, I was writing down things that she said that other writers said as I was going through these other master classes, because this is the last one that I took. And while I enjoyed going through it, I think I would have gotten more out of it if I wrote what she wrote. As far as I can tell, she writes like maybe historical fiction and like contemporary literary fiction that has to do with like family and stuff. So she has some really good advice on how to like, you know, go through journals and, you know, how to draw from like real life without self-inserting too much, you know, and like how to navigate like when you write a book that's drawing heavily upon your life, you know, how to navigate those situations where people are going to think a character is based off of them, for better or worse, because some people are like, oh, that character's me, right? And they're really excited and you're kind of like, no, that character's not you, you know. So she has some really interesting stories that she told like throughout, you know, the masterclass and everything. But I personally didn't get a lot out of it because I don't really write very literary or historical fiction or anything. And that recommendation, if you are a fan of this person, is going to hold true for like all of these classes. If you are a fan of any of these authors, definitely take their masterclass, because it's just very interesting to see like how their mind works, and like you get, you know, a sense of their personality and things like that. And it's just really interesting. Okay, so next we're going to talk about Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman teaches the art of storytelling. This is one of the thicker like workbooks. Amy Tan, just in comparison, has probably like the thinnest workbook. So I really enjoyed this masterclass. This is the first one that I took. I will say, if you are like a more intermediate writer like myself, like you've been writing for some time, the first few lessons are extremely basic. And at first I was going through them and I was like, oh wow, this is like a little bit low grade torture. But then like after the introductory lessons, he gets into the everything else, and everything else was amazing. So he's a great teacher, and definitely would recommend this class if you are a fan of Neil Gaiman. Also would recommend if you are a new writer, and then would also recommend if you're a more intermediate writer, but you do need some patience to get through the first like 2 or 3 lessons. So the main takeaway I got out of this was he had some really good advice on like how to get over writing, like blocks, like creative blocks. So Neil Gaiman's pretty, if you know, he's kind of pretty famous for like quoting that there's no such thing as writer's block, so he does address that in the class, like, and I agree with him to an extent. Like, there's no such thing as some kind of invisible force that like keeps you from writing, so like if you are blocked, it's for a reason, and so he talks about this, in detail, in depth in his, throughout these lessons, that like, if you're blocked, here are some reasons why you could be blocked, and here are some ways to get unblocked. And so I thought that was really good, because creative blocks do happen. And I've had, but they're there for a reason. It's happening for a reason. And so he's discussing those reasons and like, ways to navigate blocks and how to get over them. I also thought he had some really good world building advice, and it was more fantasy specific, but I do think that if I was motivated to write a science fiction book, that I could use those lessons to help me navigate some of those like world building hurdles that I would discover trying to write a sci-fi book for the first time. So I have more confidence, going forward, that if I want to write a sci-fi, I don't feel like I have like I feel like I'll be able to navigate it. But I would use Neil Gaiman's world building tips, because I thought he had some very good world building tips. And I did use them for a story, for like a futuristic set story that I was brainstorming at the time I took this class, like in early 2020. I ended up not writing that story for like it's a completely separate story. But it wasn't because I had a problem with the world building or anything. So yes, I would recommend this class if you are a new writer, and if you want some world building help, if you want some graphic novel writing help, or if you're just a fan of Neil Gaiman in general. Okay, next up we have R.L. Stein. So we have R.L. Stein teaches writing for young audiences. I took this specifically because I was a big R.L. Stein fan growing up, and so it was kind of like a fan moment. I just really enjoyed like seeing how his process works and how his mind works. And, like you said, you get a good sense of their personality, and I really enjoy going through his class. So I would recommend this for fans of R.L. Stein, but also if you write children's books, especially if you write horror or like suspense, because he has some really good advice on like, tension and pacing, and, building up like, tenser or scarier moments. He also has some really good advice for like marketing advice for middle grade specifically, about like, how you can do events at libraries or schools to get your books in front of their target audience. So I thought he had some really good advice for that. He also had some of the best advice of all the masterclasses I went through on like how to like get story ideas, because that's another thing that a lot of new writers struggle with, is like, how do I get story ideas? How do I, like generate like an endless supply of ideas, so that when I finish a book, I'm not like sitting around for, 6 years waiting for another idea, whatever. So he had some really good advice on that, to help you like build up that kind of like writer's muscle, so where you do kind of more easily generate ideas, which does happen with experience and over time. So I really enjoyed going through this. He's hilarious, and he has a lot of fun, with writing, which I think is an important thing, that like you have your writers who are like all tortured, and, they're just like having meltdowns online all the time. He's like, he has fun. He goes in there, he has fun. He writes the next book, he has fun. And I just think that that's important to remember, that it's okay to have fun with your writing, and it's okay if you're not miserable. Doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Okay, next we have Dan Brown teaches writing thrillers. Dan Brown is ridiculous. He's really funny. So I would recommend this for fans of Dan Brown, and also if you write thrillers, or if you just want like some general research help. So he has some really good advice on like, doing research, and, you know, ways to make it fun by basically just like following your interests. You know, like it should go without saying, but some people are like, I'm going to write a book about this because I like those kind of movies or those kind of books or whatever, but you don't have a deep enough interest in the topic. And so you end up doing research and then you're just like slogging through it and it's just like torture and then you don't want to do it. You know, so he talks a lot about like, you know, following your interests and finding things that you are interested in, so that way when you do the research, it's fun and enjoyable and it doesn't suck. And I also thought he had some really good advice for like regarding side characters, you know, because he was talking about how like when he was talking about Robert Langdon, how he always pairs Robert Langdon with people who have skills that Robert Langdon doesn't have. So they have skill sets that he doesn't have, and they also have access to places that he wouldn't have access to on his own. That way, you know, like Robert Langdon is surrounded by people, you know, who can help him, who can help, you know, move the plot forward and things of that nature. So I don't write thrillers. At the time I took this class, which I think was 2020, I wasn't even like reading even suspense yet. So I surprisingly got a lot out of it though, just like the research section and just like, you know, the characterization sections especially. So I thought this was really good. And Dan Brown and the last author I'm going to talk about, they are the only two authors who have like two different sets of writing exercises. So Dan Brown has writing exercises for if you're like new to writing and you're trying to like generate, you know, like ideas for a book. And then he has writing exercises for if you already have an idea for a book. And I thought that was really interesting and unique with him and also the last author, because nobody else did that. But his exercise specifically were for like, here's how you can generate an idea and like get a book started for like regular writing exercises. And then he also had like for your novel, which is like, you know, here's how you can like get started on your book on the idea that you already have, and also like make your idea, like give your idea more depth and like more stakes and things of that nature. And when I say that, I am talking about the workbook specifically. Like the writing exercises are not in the actual lessons. They're in the workbook. They're in the companion. So, you know, it would look like this. So writing exercises and then for your novel. And I do recommend, you don't have to print them out, obviously. I do recommend like downloading the PDF though. And you don't have to like read every single thing in the workbooks when you're going through the class. Obviously you can do what you want, but I do recommend like actually downloading the workbooks and at least like going through like the writing exercises at the end of every section and just like reading over them and seeing if it's something that you want to do or not, you know. So now we have my second favorite masterclass, which is Margaret Atwood Teaches Creative Writing. She was really funny. She reminded me a little bit of myself because like she would say something and then she would like stop and laugh at herself, and I laugh at myself a lot. And so it was just funny and entertaining to watch. So I would recommend her class, one, if you're a fan, but also if you write speculative fiction or historical fiction specifically, because she had a lot of really good like tips for like, you know, how to generate speculative fiction ideas and how to write speculative fiction, and also like how to do research. And there was something that she said specifically that actually changed my note-taking process and my outlining process a little bit. And that is that she talked about like having like a timeline of like an order of events, right? So if you have a novel that's sweeping a significant period of time, you know, even if you don't explicitly say that it's like August now in your story, you need to know that as the writer, because weather patterns will start to change and things of that nature. You know, there might be holidays, you know, and like I found that specifically extremely helpful, because like in the book that I finished, the first book that I finished this year, like in the end of February, I almost 100% sure I ran into Thanksgiving and I didn't say anything about it because I wasn't paying attention to the timeline. And so in the current project that I'm writing, I actually do have like the month and what week I'm on. And it's been like really helpful because like I've run into 4th of July and I actually had a scene where the characters are like going to be at the lake that weekend. And so now I can add like, oh, there's like a lot of people at the lake because it's 4th of July weekend. It was just like, it was just like a nice little extra touch that I can add to the story and also help the reader, you know, keep up with where we are because the story spans a few months. So I thought that was really helpful. So she had some good like research tips. She had some good advice on like how to find ideas and like short story ideas or novel ideas, because she does talk a little bit about short stories in here. And she had some really good advice for like, you know, conducting research, outlining, things of that nature. So definitely would recommend this if you want some outlining help, some research help, and like historical fiction writing help, speculative fiction writing help, and also if you're just a fan of hers in general. And yeah, she had a lot of fun with this class because, you know, she's not young. And so she wants to pass on some wisdom. And I just thought she was really delightful. So I really enjoyed this. So now my favorite masterclass was actually David Baldacci teaches mystery and thriller writing. And so, like I said, I'm not a thriller writer. maybe like psychological thriller, but I'm not like most thriller books are like, they're just very like high octane, high energy, you know, high, big stakes. You know, I'm more like a, you know, this only affects this group of people kind of writer. But this was my favorite. Also, this is kind of heavy. This is probably the thickest workbook out of all the masterclasses. And he did something similar to Dan Brown, but what he did was he had writing exercises for like new writers, and then not every single chapter, but a lot of chapters had writing exercises for your working novel. And so he was, like I said, him and Dan Brown were the only two people who had 2 sets of writing exercises. He's the only one who had writing exercises specifically for some people who have already started working on the book to just like help you add layers and, you know, give you some other things to consider, help you like deepen, you know, character arcs and, you know, your plot and things of that nature. So I thought that was really interesting. It was a really nice touch. So he was probably the most serious out of everybody that I talked about, other than N.K. Jemisin. She took herself very seriously, but not in a funny way. He took himself seriously in like a very entertaining way. And also, you know, he's probably the writer that I felt the most understood going through his class, because like his like first lesson after the introduction lesson, you know, when he was talking about like how to find ideas, you know, he's like, writing is a way of life. And I was just like, wow, he's really intense, but it was like entertaining. It was funny. And he did enjoy it himself. And, you know, he laughs a lot and things of that nature, but he took it very seriously. And I could tell because he was like, I really want to help you. And I really appreciated that. Not that I didn't like everybody's, you know, lighter approach, but I really liked how seriously he took this. So I just want to show you this. This is in the writing process section. So we have some writing exercises and then for your working novel. So I thought that was just, like I said, a really good touch. So I recommend this class for people who write mystery and thrillers, fans of David Baldacci, and also just anybody who takes their writing seriously, like me, where you're like, I want to be a published writer. I want to be a good writer. And his lessons were very accessible. So I think that if you are a new writer, you'll get a lot out of it. And also if you're a more intermediate writer, you're not going to be bored by any of the like newbie sections. Because I think he did a really good job of like covering those like more basic topics without it being like boring and like really basic. He covered the topics in a way that made me feel like even as like an intermediate writer, I could still get a lot out of what he has to say. You know, he also talked about like, you know, he sees like when you're a writer, you see the world through like a writer's lens. And so that helps you like later on, like when you're trying to build up that, I don't know, like your writing bones. like at some point you get to the point where like you get ideas from everywhere, you know? And so I think he had some good advice on like how that works and how to like start building up those writing muscles over time. You know, because that's where I am now. Like if I want a story idea, you know, I could probably get one in a day. You know, I can generate an idea pretty quickly at this point, but he kind of teaches you like how you can kind of get to that point. And one of the other reasons why this is my favorite masterclass is I thought he had probably the best and most accessible advice when it comes to doing research, because I considered myself to be very research adverse until after I went through this class. And so this is one of the reasons why I did so much research with the current project that I'm writing. He gave some really good advice on like how to conduct interviews, you know, because he apparently, I haven't read anything that he's written, but he apparently writes like some like he has main characters who are like in the CIA, and he'll like interview somebody who like works for the FBI or the CIA or something, or the NSA, you know, and I guess he lives close to Washington DC, in one of those states that surround Washington DC, and so he can like just ask his friends, you know, anybody who works for the NSA, and then like he can like get an interview. But and I don't plan on doing research like on that level. He has like some high level research, but he made it very accessible. He made me feel like that if I wanted to go, you know, like to like a clinic, like an eating disorder clinic or something, and talk to somebody there, like he made me feel like, you know, it was something that I could actually do and I could get something out of it, and like how to conduct interviews and, you know, research. And he actually showed us, he had like this huge stack that was like this huge stack of like all this research, and then he's like, he uses this much. And what it did though, and I do think that is like accurate, because I did a lot of research for my current project and I'm only using like a little bit of it, but I think all that extra research created like a more stable foundation for the story. And so like he was talking about how like, you know, all this research that he had to do just to understand like how a bomb works and how to defuse a bomb. So like this character, this side character in one of his novels could explain in lay terms to these people who don't understand bombs how to defuse this bomb, because like he's in another part of the world and they're talking to him over the phone. And I thought that was really interesting. But he made research seem like it was this thing that's like not only like fun, but also just like a huge asset to your story. And so just like already with like the next idea I want to write, I already have like a list of some research that I want to do for it. And I think it's really like opening up like the kind of stories I'm willing to write, because I'm now no longer like, oh, I don't want to do that because I'll have to do a lot of research. So now I'm like, oh, I'm really actually interested in this topic. I could do some research on this topic, and then that'll make the story better overall, because it's kind of like, if you've heard like with world building, sometimes it's kind of like an iceberg. Like you only see the top of the iceberg, but like most of it's still under the water. And like even though people only see the tip of the iceberg, it's kind of like you can feel the entire iceberg. So because he does all this research, you know, on like, I don't know, how an FBI agent works and whatever, it's like you can feel that when you read the book. Like you feel like this character is a real FBI agent or something. And so for the first time, I felt like not only that I could handle some research, but that I wanted to do some research. And so I no longer feel like I'm research at first. And so I feel like he actually has made me a better writer. And the last reason why this was my favorite writing masterclass is because he was the only one who had like a lesson specifically to like give you a pep talk. Nobody else did that. Literally nobody else. Everybody else is just like, okay, yeah, go have fun. And that's totally fine. But like, he kind of understands what it's like to like be in the trenches, right? And like trying to get an agent and wanting to be a writer and like have books published and like write more books and get those published. Like he really understands what it's like to be sitting there wanting those things and not having any of them. And so he gave this really good pep talk at the end that I just really needed to hear at the time. And I think it's made it like easier for me to keep going, because sometimes you just need somebody who understands to give you a pep talk, you know. Okay. So those are all the writing specific masterclasses that I've taken. I am going through Shonda Rhimes' screenwriting class, but that's just because I want to go through a screenwriting masterclass before my subscription ends. So that is all for this video. Basically, I just wanted to like just give an overview of some writing specific masterclasses if you were thinking about, you know, getting a subscription to masterclass and wondering if it's worth it. I think it's $180 for a year. I'm on a free year right now because I did I previewed a masterclass and gave them feedback on the class, and so to thank me for my time, they gave me a free year of masterclass. So I'm going through that right now. But this is my third year of masterclass, and so I do think that it's 100% worth it if you want advice from people who are pros and they also have been where you have been and they understand, and they have some really good advice. They have some more advanced advice than you're going to get from like other writers who are not going to be published yet. And so there's just something about having somebody who's like a boss in their field, who's very successful, you know, passing their wisdom on to you. There's something very validating about it too, because it's like you can see similarities between the way you write and the way they write and the way they think and the way you think, you know, and you kind of feel like you're in this big, you know, like similar bowl together. You feel like that even though we write very differently and we have different ideas, you know, that we have like these things in common. So it's, you know, it's good for some commiseration and stuff like that as well. So yes, I do think at least 1 year and, you know, maybe taking like 5 writing master classes or something, I think it's 100% worth it, because I've gotten a lot out of it, especially like this last year, and taking Margaret Atwood's and David Baldacci's, and those two specifically have just been like really, really helpful. I have taken other master classes, like I took, you know, Alicia Keys' songwriting masterclass. That was really helpful because you may not know, but I do a little bit of songwriting as a hobby, just as a hobby. And I found that extremely helpful. So, you know, there are other things on there. I've gone through a few cooking master classes. I went through Natalie Portman's acting class, and she had some really good advice on how to do research. Now she's researching for like acting roles, but it also translated really well, you know, to like writing, especially if you write like historical fiction and stuff. So that is all. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.